This is training practice for me to learn how to talk. I want to learn how to say jokes at the end of each sentence smoothly, smoother than a glass of cold peanut butter on a hot summer day. That type of phrase things. Only I want to do it well and I want to do it right, and I'm not exactly sure how to do that. In fact, I feel more confused than a postman on his first paper route in an unfamiliar territory surrounded by hostile canines. And I think the more that I do this, the more natural it will come. In fact, I want it to come so naturally to me that I'll be standing up in front of an audience and I'll just have these one-liner jokes coming to me faster than a NASCAR driver hopped up on Red Bull vodka. So bad. But I want them coming to me so much so that I have to literally stifle them down because they just show up unannounced like the CIA on an LA afternoon. And I think this is going to also require me to come up with more pop culture references, because the more relevant I am, the easier it is going to be for me to think of ideas that people are talking about. Because I want it to have more interest than an Instagram see more on Threads reel post. That one didn't really make sense. But I want to grow my list of references, and I believe before long I'll have a library larger than your great Aunt Bertha. And I think if I can make some of them more personalized like that one, it will hit deeper than your love for barbecue potato chips, which may not hit with some people if that's not what they're into. But I want to find things that are, I guess, universally liked and disliked so that I can use my words to charm people harder than a rattlesnake on cocaine. And that one didn't really make sense. However, there's something about saying swear words or using vulgar terms that I think causes the joke to be driven home a little bit deeper. But I don't just want to go deep, I want to go broader than your great Aunt Bertha. But using the same one can work, or it might not. In fact, it could cause my talk to break down harder than a brand new Chevy. Yeah, but I'm gonna have to work on it. But if the pattern that I'm sort of recognizing here is I say a term like broken or fatter or slower or more expedient or whatever it is, and then I tag on a reference that people are going to connect to and go, oh yeah, that is a parallel. And making parallels is hard. Harder than a block of frozen cheese on a cold summer evening. That one's really bad. Are you listening to me? And the fireplace is hotter than my undying passion for League of Legends. No, the accurate response from you would be Teamfight Tactics, but I would want to find something that people both love and are a little bit embarrassed of, but it's not completely taboo. It's acceptable, but people don't really want to talk about it. Like my undying love for The Wiggles 3, or to name it like Zootopia 2, or to name an obscure thing that people all know of, but no one's really crazy about. Crazier than a room full of rats. some of them aren't even funny, but I believe that in fact, I think most of them aren't even funny, but I believe as I do more of this, it's going to push me to become more creative in the funny realm. And perhaps some jokes are just going to continuously land harder than the Apollo 3, harder than the fill in the blank crash landed on the moon. And I think if I continuously re-say the same ones, the super fans might even just be able to quote me on them before I even say it. Faster than Lightning McQueen in Cars 3. But that one's a bit on the nose. I think in the future I'll be able to think of good jokes faster than your ass gets up for barbecue potato chips on a Sunday morning, afternoon. And I'm starting to get stuck harder than your Ford Chevy and a 2-pint gallon of ice cream cup. That doesn't make sense at all, but it sounded interesting. More interesting than Where's Waldo on a Sunday afternoon? And maybe the formula is subject, time, or location. And the subject could be drier than a bag of ice evaporating in the Sahara Desert. So that's object and place. But the time could take longer than your husband's mobile game when he's taking a dump on a Friday afternoon. I feel like we're getting somewhere. But it really comes down to knowing your direction better than the homing pigeon from Where's Waldo in World War II. I know there's a homing pigeon movie, but the movie, its reference itself evades me harder than my crush on a Saturday afternoon. And I think I'm going to have to expand my vocabulary in the time department wider than a coffee date at the watering hole when I'm 12 bottles deep. So the structure is present, but the content really sucks. It needs a lot of help. More help than the Volunteer Rural Firefighting Service of Australia has to offer me in a 24-hour period. But I'm expanding my vocabulary, and I believe that as the vocabulary expands, I'll have more ideas than the Great Library of Alexandria, which burned down to the ground, making it not a very great example for this thing, which is another way I can do a double diversion, because in the first method of the joke, we're doing a single pattern interrupt, where we curveball you harder than Lightning McQueen on a Sandy Channel raceway. It's not even a word, I made that up. But the secondary pattern interrupt is where the word flops harder than a sea lion at the SeaWorld Backflip Championships, which isn't a thing, and if it was, I don't think there would be a whole lot of flopping. Which that joke in itself was a flop, but it was a poor example of a double pattern interrupt. Although you could argue that joke was poorer than Mick Scrooge after he chose to be generous, although he wasn't really poor, he was just less rich than he was the day before. But the true issue is learning how do we combine the previous scripting techniques that we teach, such as the sentence starters, which keep people glued to your screen harder than rat's ass on a piece of sticky paper waiting to be drowned, which is a poor example because we don't drown our viewers with anything but love. And that's an example of a great run-on where the joke evolves harder than a pile of feces in Sport 2. I like that one, for those who know Sport. But the likability scale of a joke determines entirely on how relatable the joke is. And if you're not more relatable than Steve Jobs at an iPhone press conference, then you can probably expect no one to buy your iPhone, which isn't a big deal because the only people selling iPhones are Apple. But I could stack that up by saying the only people selling iPhones are the blue minions at Apple. Or the Bloompa Loompas at Apple. Which sounds a bit derogatory. And my goal isn't to necessarily create othered people. However, if comedians are able to do that and get away with it in a positive light and cause people to laugh, then I think it would be worth calling people out like Donald Trump calls out his shots at the golf course. Like Donald Trump calls out snipers at his golf course. I think that one's funny. But the more triggering that we can make these jokes, the more traction we're probably going to get. And when you're trying to get more traction than Michael Jackson's Pigmentation, that could also be a good one for closer than the pigmentation on under Michael Jackson's skin. That makes my skin to crawl a bit. I don't know if I like that one. It's kind of more squirmy than a dot line spider crawling up your spine. And this is more difficult than Dark Souls 3 game mode level impossible, but that's not going to stop me from trying because I believe that practice makes perfect. And I'm going for a well-done steak. So, I'm not laughing because that was funny. I'm laughing because that was so bad. I'm laughing because that was badder than Michael Jackson's singing I'm Bad, 12 hours on a boombox, playing on repeat at full volume at 12 a.m. in the morning in your neighbor's observatory, in your neighbor's garage. Because I think most people have a garage, although that joke probably wouldn't land outside of the US where people live in mostly apartments. But this is my push to learn how to share these jokes. But my phone, I understand, is filling up with this video as I talk. It's causing my phone's hard drive to fill up faster than a bowl of my tears after hearing I won't be able to play on Scar World 4 anymore. The framework is there, the content of the joke just needs to be present. And I hope that it'll get easier than a salesman trying to sell ice to Eskimos, because right now it feels harder than Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson shape-shifting into a literal piece of heavy metal, getting swallowed by a tuna and then frozen at a sushi restaurant only to be fossilized in the nuclear war and then found 100 years later by an alien species that is literally made out of rocks. And that one was a pretty long run-on joke. But I want to make my jokes shorter than Kamala Harris's interview on Saturday Night Live. And the temptation is to go all out political in this. However, I think that it would be fun to poke the bear with a stick longer than what I would